Hey everybody, thanks for joining me again on JRL Golf Academy. In this episode of JRL Golf Academy, I had the pleasure of interviewing none other than PGA's Teacher of the Year, Scott Cowx. Scott Cowx is a master at developing patterns within the golf swing, also within the short game. So I hope you enjoy this episode of JRL Golf Academy. He's back! They can't keep a good man down.
I don't know if it's just because the phone conked out, but it wouldn't kick the video back in. So I don't know what the deal was there. So my apologies. You've got polar bears trying to hook up the Wi-Fi right now, and this.
I mean, I know we closed the borders, but I didn't know that it went also into Instagram Live.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is a legal feed. I'll probably get arrested soon, but.
All right, we got to start a GoFundMe page.
I heard a couple questions about underload, overload. So that just just how much radial.
Yeah.
Okay, so a little bit more underloaded there. Generally, is going to create a little bit shallower angle attack, a little wider bottom of the arc. What I found for a lot of players, are actually going to produce more speed being underloaded because they can continue to drive their pivot. If I get too much radial, often we end up having to stall out the pivot to get out the angles at impact, and we sort of rob Peter to pay Paul.
Okay. Somebody was asking about how do you reduce overdraw to a ball flight but still keep a push draw shape?
Great question. I mean, generally you're simply trying to create, usually that's in the structure of the body. So a lot of times that overdraw is happening because we're sliding our center of mass too quickly toward the lead side. We end up with a lot of second axis tilt, lateral side bend. That's going to force the path further to the right, and we end up with big hooks. So a lot of times we're simply going to work on sort of softening how quickly we kind of transfer the mass to the left. It's still going to move left, but we have to make sure that, we have a little bit of a chance to probably rotate as we slide, and that's going to square out or neutralize the path a little bit and calm that hook down.
So the tilts are real important there as you're transitioning from 4 to 5.
Yeah, the faster I push my pressure or my toward that lead toe, toward my left toe, the more your body's going to want to go that way. So generally you're trying to slow down that pressure, move it a little bit more around the ball of the foot to the outside of the foot. That's going to help keep the structure this way, and then go ahead and push sort of after P6.
Yeah, gotcha. Kevin Quinn Golf asks, hey, Scott, can you talk about the transverse abduction and how we coach juniors that display this?
Transverse abduction. I'm not sure if he's talking about in the shoulder, in the hip, or what are we talking about?
Well, Kevin, get back to us on that. You could put it in the little question box down below, and I'll take a look at that.
He's just trying to use some big language on me.
Yeah, man. This or this? Which one is it? Up and down? G. Shaw Golf Coaching. Is there a better release pattern, Cobra, otherwise for club golfers or more beginner-like players, i.e. does a weaker player suit a certain release? You've got a pattern for that. I know you do.
I'm definitely, exactly. I'm definitely more of old school in this thinking, if you will, that, all players at some point need to learn how to use these guys a little bit. So even though it'll be perhaps a little bit more of a manual release starting out, I would have them learn how to probably add some supination, try and add a little bit of radial through impact, kind of this up the wall release, where they feel perhaps, they're controlling the loft with how much flexion they're sort of applying to the golf ball at impact, to hit the ball low, hit the ball higher. I think that's a skill that every good player just takes inherently, but we need to teach that to our beginning players and our intermediate players who really have no concept of where this thing's sort of moving around in impact, and maybe they sort of sense some of those pieces. So having them hit a lot of little, knock down, turn down, little draw 7 irons, 120 yards, whatever, just feeling those type of movements, that's going to give them great variability in the short game. It's going to give them great variability from a shot shaping perspective. But we've got to learn to use those hands.
How about I show them? Is it all right with you? If I've got a deal here to maybe just show them up the wall.
Sure, absolutely. That's a good one. Yeah. So this, you can do it, and I'll explain it when you do it.
Yep.
So basically, easy way to train this up the wall release. This is great for your beginning players who don't have a concept of how that moves. So you just offset your hands about 3 to 4 inches, left hand higher than right on the book. And what you're going to do is just have them take it about halfway back. They're going to feel a little bit of fold in the trail arm, fairly flat wrist, not too much flexion on this type of model. But what they're going to feel now is they're going to feel themselves sort of rotate the book so it faces down toward the ground about 2 feet in front of the ball. And they're going to feel the hands sort of rotate and supinate so the back of the right hand sort of faces the player at the end of the swing, okay? And this is sort of a golfing machine, up the wall release, as we call it. There are some tour players that swing this way. Bryson DeChambeau, Boo Weekley, amongst others, sort of release it in this capacity. So it's a real easy way for you to train your players how those wrists work. This is a great option for players that can't move their bodies particularly quickly.
Yeah, that's a good one there. That's a real good one there.
I've got one in French. Although Canada's bilingual, I'm not so sure I can teach in French, so I might have to get a translation on that one.
You want me to try to take that one?
Yeah, there you go.
I know a French, but it's not the one I can speak of. Let's see here. Greg Leach. Hey, Scott, is there a grip that will max our radial and flexion?
No,
Yeah,
not really.
good.
I mean, the answer is basically the more radial you push this, the more it's going to want to go toward extension. So to get sort of flexion and radial, you can play around a little bit about, where this goes across the hand. Some players will find it's easier to get into flexion when it's a little higher in the palm. Players, they might feel like it's a little more of an angle, but that is a tough motion. That is wrist option C. Sort of, we do see a lot of long hitters able to sort of increase radial, but at the same time actually increase flexion. If you can do it, that's great. You can create a lot of speed with that motion, but it's a tough one because grip position doesn't really, to be honest with you, that puts a fair amount of stress on that wrist.
Yeah, it hurts. It can hurt. I've messed around with it. It's not.
Yeah, it's not easy. There are some players that have very strong hands. I mean, Robert Garrigus, sort of Richard Jung, my guy in Japan. He kind of swings it a bit that way, and but you've got to have some pretty strong hands to be able to support that load on that wrist.
Yeah. Hey, a lot of people post this hell drill that you do. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Hell drill, just really easy. What you're going to do is take your right palm. You're going to put the grip right down, basically your index finger of that right hand. You're going to practice hitting shots like that. And what this does, this is great for players who like to play with the handle, who like to use that right hand quite actively through the ball. Either they throw it or they twist it right at the golf ball. So by hitting shots with that, right down the shaft that way, you actually have to continue your pivot, okay? So if your pivot stops, the hands are going to break apart and fall apart. It's a very difficult drill, hence why I call it the hell drill. Not a new drill. There's some other guys that have done it that way for a while, but it does breed some really good things. First time I saw it, I think, was John Sinclair actually using that drill at one point. I know Rob Cheney uses it a fair bit as well. So this type of a grip here, by putting pressure against the shaft this way, I can't axial twist this thing. I can't kind of do this. So usually for a player that hooks the golf ball, the first shot that they do with this, they're going to block it about 50 yards to the right. And they learn how they have to sort of pivot and open up a little bit more to be able to hit the ball straight with that drill. So it's an excellent one to sort of get that. Okay, you'll see a very sort of clean-looking release. You won't see a lot of that axial motion. Basically, you're teaching yourself how to square the entire golf club up. So it's one of my favorites when I'm dealing with some of my my tour clients and so on who maybe have some excessive hand stuff going on.
Yeah, I just did it. That was the first time I've really done it. That was really cool. That was very, very passive feeling, if I could say that.
Yeah, for sure. You're going to feel like the pivot's driving it. And what people have to understand is really the biggest difference between tour players and the rest of us is because they move so easily, they move so freely, their wrists are not going to change as much. So if I hold the club out in front of me and I just continue to pivot and rotate, there's very little going on at the wrist level, okay? As soon as my pivot stops either in the backswing and this keeps running on, and then I start down and I've got to stop my pivot, and then I'm throwing these arms past my body, that's where you're going to see this massive change in both the wrist movement as well as obviously the club face movement. So some of the interesting things I've seen on hack motion are, as soon as we get a player to pivot better, generally you can see the flexion extension graph be much, much more stable through the swing. So that's generally, tour players got about no more than about 25 degrees change roughly extension to flexion, regardless of whether it's sort of Cobra pattern or sort of your Tommy Fleetwood. Generally, we'll see 2 to almost 3 times as much movement in that plane with bad golfers. They'll move 70 degrees here.
Kind of goes maybe into what the Hat was talking about yesterday, how he was saying, it was all coming out of his pivot, how the club was coming out. He was saying he's guilty of a little bit of, throwing it in there a little bit too much with the hands.
Well, and I think inherently good players know where that face is. I mean, you can take a good player, flip their hands 4-knuckle grip, and after about 2 shots, they'll figure out how to hit it straight.
Yeah, they will.
And really what they're doing is they're self-organizing, right? So tour players are very good at self-organizing their bodies to be able to obviously respond to that and get the face to look a certain way. You can give them a grip that's ultra weak, and again, they're good enough to figure out how to get that face back on the golf ball. And that's a skill that we need to teach all of our players, is that, call it club face awareness, if you will, or in reality, it's not the face you're feeling. You're really feeling that center of mass moving around.
Yeah. Okay. CSW Golf. How do you help slower players hit up on the ball without tilting their spine backwards or simply flicking their wrist to let the club head pass the grip end?
That's why underload pattern exists right there. Okay. Most players that are trying to do that, they have a lot of radial. Obviously, the only way I can get my upward angle of attack is to tilt.
Yeah.
If I tilt, that slows rotation. If I can't rotate, that shoulder gets trapped. As soon as I get to that golf ball, this arm's exploding and going all over the place. I'm just going to see the same shot twice. So for a lot of players, hitting up on it's a very sort of scary proposition. A player like Rory does it because his first move down, he actually tosses this into ulnar a little bit and brings this thing down very shallow, very wide. He actually doesn't have a whole lot of second axis tilt at impact compared to some players, but he's still able to hit, 3.5 up on the ball.
Yeah.
So, that's why with today's balls, in reality, this is a bad idea for most golfers with today's golf ball.
Yeah.
Keep it wider, keep it 90. Even DJ and these guys are typically around 90 degrees of P5 with that radial amount. You're going to have a lot easier time getting your long shots up in the air.
Yeah. That's helped me out a lot, Scott. I had the driver bugaboos, and exactly what you said there is exactly what I used to do, and that helped out a lot, that underload. It's something you guys should.
Is the more it's underloaded, the more the club face is reacting to your pivot.
Yeah.
When I've got this thing completely loaded here and I have to stop my pivot, now I've got this thing moving independently of the pivot, and that's a dangerous thing for any golfer.
I'd agree. Anthem fam, best way to combat a disconnected takeaway from P1 to P2?
Well, there's a couple I like real easy. Just if we look at the way the pressure points move on the chest on the left side, we have an initial pressure point here. Just to stay connected, you want to feel that pressure point kind of move across the bottom of the chest from P1 to 2, and then it's going to start moving up the chest to P3, P4. So we end up making sort of an L shape like this. So to do that, what has to happen is we have to sort of turn a lot without moving the arms. That gets this left arm a little bit in at P2, but it keeps that pressure point where now we get this very sort of tight, sort of connected package to the top.
Yeah. There's two things that I like to do also there. One is usually I'll see it in the top of their bicep of their lead arm, where they'll start, they'll start internally rotating the shoulder, pronating too much with the wrist. That'll come off. Also, the other thing I like to look at if you got a real visual learner is that when they're taking it back, when they look down, they're actually seeing their hands trace through their shoelaces, kind of the middle of the shoelaces is another thing if you're a visual learner.
Yeah, that's a good one, and I think that you can kind of do that a couple of ways. I'll just try and move the camera a little bit here. So basically, if you take your lead arm, you internally rotate it a ton. Okay, so externally rotate this. So take your setup, rotate this externally with the left arm, and practice making takeaways, keeping that arm external. You feel that tight pressure point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Good way
Absolutely.
for to feel that. Most players that get loose from P1 to 2, right? We start to see this thing kind of flip out this way, and we add a lot of roll to the shaft, and then later on we're going to have some issue at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Can you all do this every day to get us through the quarantine? Well, we might have to make it a regular thing there, John. What do you think?
Scotty, I'd love that, buddy. I as a teacher and as a golf nut myself, I can never get enough of Scotty. So I'm all for that, Scotty. I am all for that.
Maybe we can do like a every 2-3 weeks or something. That'd be kind of good. I know you've got a great list. I know I enjoyed watching the first one you did with Oscar there, and I enjoyed got to watch the hat a little bit yesterday, so that was good.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of great. We've got Mark Blackburn coming on now on Saturday.
Nice.
We've got Nick Clearwater. We have Scott Hamilton coming in on Sunday. So Charlie Hoffman's on Friday. So we've got a bunch of great guys coming in. But I really was looking forward to this one with you today as well. So
all those guys. Mark's certainly cutting edge with ground force stuff, and I really admire a lot of stuff that Mark does. And Nick's a beaut. Obviously, I've known Nick for 10 or 12 years now, and
Yeah.
I think he's sort of like a hidden genius a little bit. He knows a lot more than he lets on, and he's doing good stuff with Golf Tech and so on. And but I think you've got a real nice list of guys coming out. I'm looking forward to seeing one with Brady as well, and a few of your other LA guys. That would be good.
Yeah, man, it's gonna be it's happening. I mean, it gets me up each day. I know that we're in quarantine, but this really does excite me a lot to be able to speak to you guys. And this is awesome that we're able to bring this to people all around the world now. I couldn't be any happier. So here's a good question here from Mitch. How do you define a hitter versus swinger, and what type an individual would fall under?
Well, Mitch should have watched Greg yesterday. Mitch is one of my students here in Canada, and we've been trying to get Mitch to do a number of different things, but at the end of the day, Mitch really needs to solve his trail arm. Once he's able to do that, he'll be fine. But, basically the designation, Mitch, is whether or not we're sort of actively using this right hand to push the club, or as Greg sort of mentioned yesterday, we're sort of using the turning in the circle to sort of line all these alignments up toward impact. Truthfully, if you really look at it, I think that all players are probably a little bit of both to a certain degree. Maybe Payne Stewart was the ultimate swinger. I don't know. But, I think today's players are sort of a combo of the two.
Yeah, I think they're mainly, I call it switters, swing hitters.
Yeah, exactly. I think that at different times, to be honest with you, I mean, I've played good golf both ways, sort of actively trying to hit this thing, and other times trying to sort of let the club work and use my pivot a little bit differently. And that's why this is a great game. And why what did Greg say yesterday? Something like 84 quadrillion. That was Joe Daniels. 84 possibilities. So at the end of the day, though, put it this way, if your swing style allows you to control the low point with a repeatable face, that's where you got to stop looking. Okay.
Yeah.
And too many people are looking too long. What they don't realize is tour players just have to get to a point, where it's good. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good. And then from there, their management, the way they play, will do most of the job for them. But everyone's going to have ebbs and flows in terms of how well they hit the golf ball. So there is no perfection there, and even a guy like Hogan had bad days. They're just a little bit less bad than everybody else.
Yeah. I also understand, especially speaking of tour players, it's interesting. The few that I've been fortunate to work with, it's like you were saying, they don't know these things that we're talking about. Most of them are like, dude, don't even give that to me. I don't even all they're looking for is a feel, and does it come out the right window that they're expecting it to come out of? That's about it.
1,000%.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. You know, that's sometimes, you know, if I wanted to be a really great player and work on my game, you know, I'd probably have to stop teaching to a certain extent, just to sort of keep your mind focused on the right task, because, you know, the teacher mind and the player mind are very, very different. And, you know, that player, as you said, is just looking for a set of feels, looking for something that's going to either sort of foster some confidence, if you will, or give them a slightly different sensation. It might not even physically look all that much different, but in their brain it's totally different. And,
Right.
and the result you're dealing with it's like tuning up a Ferrari is sort of my best analogy there. Is no matter what you do, it's an impressive car. It's just you're trying to keep that thing fine-tuned, and the amount of change that you're trying to make is so fractional. You know, we're talking tenths of a shot or even hundredths of a shot difference across a season could make, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars difference. So,
Yeah, that's the truth there, brother. Talk us through golf norm. Talk us through Mac Hughes' pattern.
Well, Mackenzie, you know, I've had the privilege of working with Mackenzie since he was 15 years old, and you know, he had a typical pattern at that time where he hit big sweeping draws. Basically, he's always had a very strong, almost four-knuckle left-hand grip, and you know, he went to college and realized he had to drive the ball quite a bit better, straighter, and not necessarily a lot longer. He's never been a tremendously long hitter. He's definitely longer now, though. He's gained about 8 or 10 miles an hour across his pro career from when he first turned pro. But
wow,
basically, we all tried to create a fade pattern for him, so his release pattern is a little different because of his four-knuckle grip. But we've created a fade by altering his tilt. So we have quite aggressive pelvic tilts, creating a lot of a tilt this way. That creates a spine angle here at P5 that's quite vertical. So all things considered equal, when the spine is leaning a little bit more this way, it's a lot easier to swing left and turn. When the spine gets into an early lateral side bend, we're generally going to see that pass shoot out to the right. We're going to see our exit kind of shoot out to the right. So we built a pattern where we've got this fairly strong left-hand grip and some pretty steep tilts here. That's going to push that hand pad out just a little bit for him so that he can go ahead and hit that cut. And that's sort of what we've done. I mean, really, we haven't made any adjustments to that in the last 8 or 10 years. It's just sort of maintaining it. At times, he'll slide a little bit. Lower body gets a little unstable. So now all of a sudden, instead of starting down and sort of getting that hand path moving outwards slightly, now that hand path starts to get a little bit underneath. Okay, then he starts to change his release pattern to the ball. You know, he doesn't ever want to see that ball really turn left. So as soon as that ball starts curving left, then he has a hard time, you know, where to aim, where do I hit this thing? Because the ball's not really reacting off of what he wants. So, you know, very early on, just by understanding the anatomy a little bit, we're able to create that fade pattern that he prefers without actually doing things like changing grips or anything like that. So, you know, at this point in time, he knows his swing very well. Nowadays, it's more or less every once in a while he just gets a little too steep. So we try and increase his rotations. He can do something I don't think I've ever seen any other player can do. He can actually hit full drivers with a towel under both arms and keep that towel for the whole swing. That's a really difficult exercise. And he can actually rip full drivers like that. So you need a tremendous amount of thoracic mobility to be able to do that. But that helps him sort of shallow out his fades. So we're trying to keep it on the fade side of the spectrum, about 3 to 5 left on swing direction on an iron. But at the same time, we don't want his VSP, his swing plane, getting too steep.
I love how you do those things with him where you do things that just encourage those motions. It's not like you're telling him necessarily to do this. There's certain things that you do just to encourage that. I think that's the beauty of what you do with your coaching there.
Well, with him, if I tell him too much, he tells me to shut up because, you know, he's one of those players, like you said, he doesn't want the explanation, like zero explanation. He just wants the drill, do this drill for the next week and, you know, go from there. And he's happy with that. And as a result, you know, often really it's just a matter of finding new drills for him and giving him some slightly different fields. Same concepts, like the same concepts we're working on for 8 or 10 years, just to sort of maintain this level of high level ball striking. And you know, when he plays well, the putter's very good. When he doesn't play well, you know, the driver, you know, he's got to hit about 61, 62% of his fairways to have a good week. So when that number drops below 60, he's more inclined to miss cuts or barely miss cuts. So his best tournaments, he's usually over 61, 62% on fairways hit, and he's up around 302 or something in distance this year.
Oh.
So he's long enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's long enough to compete.
Yeah, he came out of college maybe at around 109, 110, and through a fair amount of work, he can get it up to 120 now when he wants. But his gamer speed's about 116.
That's pretty cool, man. That's the beauty that Scott, you oversee everything. It's not just you're not just necessarily a swing mechanic on the range, as great as you are with that, but you oversee a lot of different aspects of the game because you understand it's a big picture, right?
Well, it is a big picture, and we're fortunate with Mackenzie. It's actually sort of a team approach. Myself and Derek Ingram is the national head coach to the national team boys here in Canada. He's been in the picture for about 10 or 12 years as well. So, we work together. He's got, sports psychologists and a trainer and so on that we have talked to a little bit in the past. And from there, now that he's a tour player, he kind of controls the circus, if you will. It's less of us sort of leading him, and instead he kind of leads us and says, and this is what I need, guys. And, so at this point in time, I see Mackenzie probably in person only about 4 to 6 times a year, probably.
Wow. People don't realize that, I think.
Yeah, we'll do some online stuff here and there. I'll fly down to Charlotte, or he's from here, so he'll come home and we'll do a little bit of work. But, on tour, he does very little work. Derek's out there a little bit more because he works with a couple of the other Canadian players as well. But, mostly what Derek runs him through is sort of maintenance, TrackMan numbers and combines. And, Derek's great at sort of organizing those parts of the game, and very easy guy to talk to. So, again, it's all about that team approach, trying to push the action first. And, I'm just fortunate to obviously be a part of that team. So,
yeah, well, you're doing a great job. Hey, Mitch has a question. How do you advise a player to adjust who lacks right shoulder external rotation and side bend?
Well, most players get into trouble there because they overbend. Okay, so anatomically, when you overbend that trail arm, it's very difficult to actually push it into external. Especially, Mitch is built like a boxer a little bit. He's got wide shoulders, and he's got a short spine, but he's thick through the upper back and shoulder. So he's already a little bit limited with external anyway. So as a result, when that trail arm bends too much, it's very difficult for this arm to ever go external. He tends to come down with that arm a little bit internal this way. So I've talked to Mitch about this in the past, but he needs to feel like the top of his backswing is sort of that wide with that right arm. And if that's as far back as he can go, that's as far back as he should go, because that's going to allow him to keep that arm a little bit more toward external.
Yeah, you feel like people try to get too long with their backswing, mainly through just flexing the arms, right?
Yeah, a bit of a false backswing. Mitch is a good athlete, though. He rotates. If anything, he actually over-rotates a little bit.
Oh, wow.
So lots of capability, but he tends to want to collapse these elbows like this and toward the top. And that, what people don't realize, when your elbows separate, what happens, I got this flat left wrist here, but if I pull my elbows apart, that pushes this lead wrist into extension. So a lot of times when a player looks great at P3, got this nice flat wrist, they go to P4, that elbow starts to separate, and then this thing kind of goes there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the reasoning for that. So I'd rather keep a player shorter, generally a little bit more together there. The other option you have is to do, obviously, what George does a little bit and say, okay, let's just push this thing way across and give myself some time then to be able to go external later on. So that's the second way you could do it, is sort of run that pattern a little bit.
Let me ask you this about that going past, quite a bit. So, it looks pretty, right? So, right there, that looks pretty right there. But when you start maxing out ranges of motion, do you feel like, okay, if this is max internal, and then I've got max external, do you think it's sometimes easier to feel those things, number one? And do you also notice, like, through history, if we take like a Lee Trevino who took it way outside and dropped back in, it's easier to repeat those patterns than trying to be like on a tightrope always? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, great questions. I think, again, this is why it's got to be case by case, and
Yeah.
in front of you is going to exhibit certain traits, from the anatomy that we can either use to help them or that's currently hurting them. Obviously, George's done a good thing with Matthew Wolf. Matthew Wolf came with that package, and
Yep.
he didn't mess with it, which I think is a lot of the skill of a good coach, is recognizing what are the things that are sort of non-negotiable points that this player is just not going to change. And, certainly throughout history, there's lots of players that have been internal on the way back. And then they
for sure.
External on the way down. And
Miller Barber,
Yeah, exactly. Certainly nothing wrong with that type of a pattern. The only consideration there is if they can handle this, and they can sort of do that similarly every single time, then all the power to them. What I find, though, is for every player that can kind of do that consistently, there's a lot of players that can't do it consistently. So then they start having low point problems. Low point keeps moving around. Swing direction keeps moving around. If it comes too far, they start getting underplaying. If it doesn't come far enough, they're a little overplaying. So it just depends on what that player sort of exhibits. But there's a couple players that I work with that tend to get a little bit across, a little bit internal, but they do a great job of sort of getting this back into position.
They have the matching piece to it. And I'd also say to that point, if you've got like a Matthew Wolf that shows up doing that, obviously the kid's probably striping it already. That's when you probably would highly consider like not touching it. But I mean, if a guy comes into me or girl is like this and can't hit the ball, well, we're going to change it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a real business model out there, I think, for golf pros to, teach tour players their golf swing, as opposed to, instead of putting their ego out there and saying, you're going to swing it my way because every time you go and play, I can say that you're a certified whatever. Instead, we have to sort of check our ego at the door and say, let's reteach you your swing. And that's ultimately what we kind of did with Eduardo, is sort of reverse that and sort of went back to his 2009, 2010 swing models and said, hey, let's rebuild this because this is when you played great and this is when it felt good to you. So let's just kind of rebuild that model. And he was kind of the first guy to really go underloaded for me. It was a very underloaded model, very Steve Stricker-ish. Ball flight kind of was a very slight fade. We won the Dunlop Masters in Japan in, I think it was 2009. I think his ball control, he said, was the best of his career. And I mean, Eduardo knows these things. He keeps stats on every practice session and every round he's ever played. So he knows when his ball striking is good. So we just read that model and happily, I think it's sort of maintaining that model for him.
Yeah, that's pretty rad there, what you've done with him over the years. How to lower attack angle with irons?
How to lower the attack angle, like being, players too steep?
That's what I'm guessing here.
Is that what you're guessing?
From powder.
Yeah, I think what you'll find with attack angle, again, attack angle is going to be controlled by a couple things. First of all, how much radial you have, how much sort of width in the body you have. So if everything sort of ends up sort of in a little tight circle like this with a lot of radial, that's going to factor into it. Head position at impact is a big one. So if I'm sliding the head of this too far, I start to increase that attack angle. So we have a number of options. The easiest one, in my opinion, is just get rid of some of the radial. Just underload it a bit. That's going to widen it. That's going to shallow out the angle of attack without having to change too much of the other pieces.
I'm telling you all, you guys should go learn that underload from Scott. It fixes a lot of things. Go to one of his certification schools. I promise you, it'll fix a lot of things.
As an aside there, John, I'm going to be running the Scott Cowx Certified 5.0 stuff online.
Okay,
I'm in. Of 3 to 5 coaches at a time, live webinars on Zoom. I'm hoping to start that in about 2 weeks. I'm going to do that first with some of my European guys, Kenneth Hansen in Denmark, and a couple of the coaches there just as a trial run. But then I'm going to do it about once a week, so you can sign up for that if you're interested. The cost will be less than me obviously being there in person because I don't have the travel and everything else involved with it. But I will be running those things hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
Can you take my money now?
Sure. PayPal.
I'm in, buddy. I am in on that. Sean Kahn, can y'all do this every day to get us through this quarantine? I'd love to, but I'd love to. Basic Nugget, same. Yeah, do it. Hope to catch the 5.0 down the road. When you caddy for students, do you only caddy or do you do any coaching too from?
You know, that's a fun one. You know, I've been privileged enough or blessed enough. I've caddied for Mackenzie multiple times, you know, a bunch of Canadian Opens. And I coached and caddied him at the U.S. Open in 2013 that Justin Rose won at Marion. And, you know, that was a real eye-opener just in terms of how hard a golf course can be really set up. And, you know, it's interesting because you have to kind of take that hat off as a coach and kind of shut up and keep up. And when you're out in the golf course, you really have to let the player lead you, you know, and we've got a great relationship and, you know, we can talk about shots and so on. He trusts, you know, sort of my strategy and judgment a little bit and to sort of back that up. But at the same time, I'm not going to offer that to him unless he wants it. So, you know, caddying's a much tougher gig than people realize. It's really about that relationship with the player, and you've kind of got to read the player and determine, you know, what kind of state of mind they're in, you know, where they are sort of emotionally and physically. It's fun. Like, I enjoy it. I'm going to hopefully, you know, caddy for Richard Jung, possibly in the Canadian Open, but I think it's going to be, or I think it's been canceled now. So
Yeah.
it's supposed to be in June. So I think we're done with that. But, you know, I enjoy, you know, the other thing too is I caddied for Richard at Corn Ferry final stage this year. And, you know, he played well. He shot 11 under and missed by a shot, getting the 8 guaranteed starts. But played really great. It was nice to see him play and see what he does under the gun and see what his missed patterns are and see what his tendencies are.
Yeah, yeah. Scroll through there real quick, Scotty. See if there's any questions there you want to go kind of. We've had a ton of questions there. I'm sorry, guys, that we haven't gone through all these. There's a ton of them here, and we're appreciative of them all. You want to take one in there?
Yeah, there's one that says, how do you assess unique and keep unique because of injury or to change it? So I think, you know, what the question is, how, you know, do I take a player who might have some physical injury or some, let's say, joint inhibition, you know, and movement problems and so on, maybe be able to custom make that. And, you know, we're going to work within the parameters, and some of those parameters we can change. And that's a conversation you want to have at the club level with your golfers is, you know, are you willing to work on your body? And if they are, that's going to change my whole sort of trajectory with that player and what we're going to work on. If they say, I'm not going to work on my body, I just want to get a little bit better, that's going to, you know, totally change the lesson. So I'm going to work within their physical parameters at that point. There are some players, for example, really thick-chested, thick-back players, short biceps, you know, that have zero external rotation capabilities. And those players, you know, to a certain extent, are going to be forced into a swing pattern that's quite a bit lower, kind of underneath the shoulder plane, in this capacity to be able, because then they can kind of play punch elbow this way around their body. Make too much adjustment. And the second that they go up, they're sort of dead because they're going to do this on the transition.
Yeah, yeah. There was one here. I'll take this one. Kevin Quinn Golf. How do you get the trail foot to bank on the downswing? I think personally, Scotty, let's see what you think of this.
Yep.
I think personally, the banking of the foot is dictated a little bit by the hip motion, number one, about we'll say the linear component, but also something that's really important in the banking of the foot is actually understanding how this foot actually kind of, in a way, it works counterclockwise, or it works clockwise. So that would keep, can you see me in there, Scotty?
Yep, I got you.
Yeah. So the trail foot, as it's coming out, a little bit of it has to do with linear motion. That helps with banking. The more that I start spinning early or hanging back, the more that my foot is going to rotate more in a counterclockwise motion. So actually, there's a linear motion component from the hips moving forward, but also the feeling of this right foot moving in a counterclockwise motion as I'm turning, going through. That's what will keep this foot banked inward longer. So looking from here, as I'm coming down, it's working this way more. It's not working this way. It's working the other way. It's working in a clockwise manner as I'm turning. So those are a couple of things that I'll focus on with my students when we're working on the banking portion.
Yeah, I think some great points there for sure. And I think to add to that just a little bit, you'll see that, a little bit of foot flare often at setup kind of helps that. You never want the ankle to sort of kick around the toe, and so sometimes you put a water bottle or a tee beside the right heel, if they're kicking around like this, they kick the water bottle over. The only way to not do it is they have to feel, as you said, it's mostly a reaction from the pelvis. They've got to learn how to slide and actually get a little bit of pelvic tilt, involved to keep that foot banked. If they sort of jump up onto the ball of the foot and the right hip goes straight to the sky, then all of a sudden they start creating some other issues there. The other thing too is look at Grant Waite, who I'm fortunate to do some work with here and there, or you look at Greg Norman. They actually have the sort of the drag the toe the other way sort of look on some of their full shots, and that little bit of counter rotation, as you said, actually would almost drag the foot inwards and behind them a little bit, and that's sort of a stabilization point that stops the pelvis from over rotating.
Yes.
And a lot of players think that it's all about just rotate as much as you can, and it's like no. You gotta learn to turn, but you also gotta learn to slide and tilt an appropriate amount.
It's a balancing act. It's an absolute balancing act. And that other point, with what you were talking about, like the Norman deal about his trail foot sliding back, I've used that a lot, Scotty, and I don't know about you, but I've used that a lot with people that have a difficult time getting it's kind of hard to actually come over the top from doing this, pulling that back. That's one, but it's also helped a lot in that sense. Also, it's helped a lot of my students understand how to reflex properly also through the ball and not like it's an early extending drill as well with that left foot, like the trail foot, like Norman sliding back.
There's a great point there by Mike Manavian there. It's also a braking mechanism. So when you're using that foot a little bit as a braking mechanism to sort of stabilize the pelvis a little bit and maybe deliver the angular component a little bit more consistently, we can kind of use that a little bit that way. But generally, I think that you'll see often with a lot of players, the iron shots, wedge shots, great wedge players definitely keep that foot banked very quietly, very passively, because I think that helps them control their angle of attack. You get high up on the toe, generally we end up steep with a lot of extension. We're going to see all sorts of different ball flights with the wedges. So generally you'll see that very passive Steve Stricker, David Toms type of a footwork on the wedges. Maybe a little bit more jump, if you will, when you're talking about, Justin Thomas trying to bust drivers up and over trees and else. But in general, I think that a lot of players can use that banking, especially at the amateur level.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we take like 3 more questions here, Scotty, before you melt in the sun there,
Sure, yeah, it's great. I'm getting burnt on one side of my head. It's good.
I don't want my snowman to melt, so.
Next time we'll do it this way.
Let's see here. Why don't you grab a couple there? Let's see what you like. Go ahead and.
All right, Kevin Quinn wants to know how to carve an armadillo. Yeah, exactly.
Go ask Mike Ray.
That was the Mike Ray pattern from
That's
Dallas.
Right.
He didn't like carving ducks. He wanted to carve the armadillo. So, we talked about basically how a wood carver carves a duck is he takes a chunk of wood and he takes away everything that's not a duck. So in this pattern, what we're trying to do is we're trying to eliminate all the pieces that you don't need. So a lot of players, will have excessive arm lift and some other pieces that really they don't need in there. So we'll just sort of preset a good impact, put a little bit of dorsiflexion in the trail wrist and the takeaway, add some pivot to that, and then kind of come back to the golf ball. And it tends to clean up a lot of the lines of the swing. Kind of simplifies things to a certain extent. But if you're in Texas, it's the armadillo pattern.
What is it in California then?
I think it's the carve a. How do you carve?
I guess we can go with the duck pattern. So, something like this, right? So you're an impact.
Yeah, you're presetting. Add a little bit of dorsiflexion, about a foot, a dorsiflexion there in the wrist, but don't move the hand. And then just go ahead and pivot. So it just kind of gives players a feeling. Most players that struggle with delivering the club, they tend to have excessive amounts of radial up and down. So they learn how to deliver this thing a little bit more this way with a combination of some dorsiflexion and a little bit of supinate.
Yeah, that was a good one there.
All right, one more question. Let's see.
Yeah, let's get one more in there. We'll get one more in there, guys.
Golf Norm, one of my buddies from Europe there. Which pattern would you start to build with an athletic and passionate junior at age 10? And do you expect him to swing with the same pattern through puberty? Absolutely not. Most of my great standout juniors have gone through at least 2 to 3 to 4 patterns across puberty, because we don't know where they're going. You know, we don't know how big they're going to be, how fast they're going to be. And their needs are different. I mean, to win junior events, you just got to hit the ball far enough. You got to be able to chip and putt. You know, if you do that, you can win some junior events up until probably, you know, age 12. Except if you're in Southern California, you got to shoot 62 every day. But the rest of the world, you can kind of just, you know, shoot 70s and win tournaments. But as they go through puberty, you know, and they start to go through that growth spurt, and every day their nerves are being stretched, the muscles are being stretched, they basically become very gangly, very, you know, octopus falling out of a tree type stuff, and they don't know where that's going to land. So a lot of times you're changing the pattern, all of a sudden the ball starts going 30, 40, 50 yards further, and you're trying to tighten that player and keep them on the planet. And it's not until they're kind of through the throes of puberty to a certain extent they start to solidify that maybe the pattern starts to solidify. So if you can push your 10-year-old through puberty really quick, if you figure out how to do it, let me know. Okay, but generally that'll help their development, because they'll have, you know, a more sort of man body, if you will, by the time they're 15 or 16. And it's a lot easier to develop a consistent pattern when it's not changing.
Amen to that. And to your point, I mean, I've got a bunch of junior academies here in Southern Cal, and that's the thing we do see as well. They're going to go through so many different swing patterns throughout their development and stuff like that. Don't get caught up necessarily on one thing being the end all be all for them, because it is going to change. I've seen it through 13 years of teaching. It changes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're quite a renowned junior leader, sort of in LA and that area, and obviously you work a lot with the tours and then the tournaments and down there. And you know, I think the key is for both parents and coaches to understand, what does it take to be a good player at 8, to be a good player at 10, to be a good player at 12. What are the attributes? You know, a 12-year-old doesn't need to hit a 5-iron, 120 feet up in the air to hold a green. I mean, yeah, they can, but they really don't need that. You know, and then as they turn 14, 15, 16, they started entering sort of college. You know, what are the needs? What are the requirements they're going to need in college? So you kind of have to customize your improvement cycle to fit where they're at, and then more importantly, where they're going to. And if you're lucky enough to have kids that are going to continue that upward trajectory, by the time you're talking about college golf, you're really starting to talk to them about, how would a pro play this? How they their game? How do they practice? How do they travel? All those kind of ideas. And, those kind of things I think are just as important as the mechanic, for sure.
And to add to that, like you said, I run a big junior tour here as well, but what you also want to realize when those kids are developing from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, so on and so on, the competition levels changes. So, at 7 years old or 6 years old, you know what I mean? Your kid might be winning them all, but, if their scores, don't always compare it to just necessarily their tournament finishes, right? Watch the scores and watch the trend, because as the competition gets higher, all of a sudden they go, they jump up to 12 years old from 11 years old. And they're like, man, how come I'm not winning anymore? Well, dude, your scores really weren't that good at 11. So watch the scores and see the development there as well as the physical, as Scott's talking about. Okay. So you want to do one more?
It'd be fun, actually. Maybe next time we do this, John, it'd be fun to kind of maybe talk about, some of the pitfalls and some of the things that we can maybe help your students as well as students across the world, at different levels, because I think that's a whole different ballgame when you start with kids and what you're developing there. But yeah, I mean, generally Southern Cal is a hotbed. I mean, all the coaches there tend to be fantastic, in my opinion, and work really hard. And, a lot of them will work well together, and there's a good camaraderie there that are building an awful lot of great golfers in Southern Cal. And, some of the scores those kids are producing is just incredible.
Yeah, no kidding on that, man. I see it I see it out on the tours for sure. But hey, Scott, let people know again how they can reach you. Let people know. I mean, I'll let people know on Instagram, Scott certified, Scott Cowx certified. I'm on Instagram, but let other people know how they can kind of reach you and just that information, please.
Yeah, perfect. So, yeah, I mean, basically everything I do now is, I've got a website under development and so on. That'll be out in the next couple months as well. And but basically, all my stuff is posted through either Facebook, Twitter, or mostly on Instagram. So if you follow me, Scott Cowx Certified on Instagram, that's where I post all the information about classes and webinars and certifications and so on. And you can DM me for some details on pricing and so on. I said I do a lot of consulting work with a lot of the coaches actually that were here today on our little Instagram live, and I enjoy doing that as well. So we can sort of, if you're interested in that, we can kind of talk about some of those ideas as well. But generally, I'm very fortunate that most of the guys I think that have gone through my certifications have found value in what I've been doing, and are certainly fans enough to do it often, multiple times. So I'm very blessed for that, for sure.
I'm definitely one of those fans. I've learned so much the first time I went, and it's interesting. I always found whenever I worked with instructors, when I came back the next day to teaching, 100% of the time, whenever I've worked and I've really got good information, teaching became easier that very next day that I went back to teaching. And Scott was no different from the first time I went to the first certification to the second certification. It got easier each day. So I thank you for that, number one, Scott.
Well, you know what? I'm learning just like everybody else, and I've been fortunate enough to surround myself over the last 26 years as a pro with some pretty smart guys, and I think really it just takes a little bit of creative thinking outside the box, and we'll take some of the information, for example, that the PhDs are presenting to us and make that into a workable fashion. And if anybody's really asking, a lot of what we deal with is sort of a Coles Notes version of some of the stuff that you're going to read from the PhDs, and understand how that correlates, and looking at these swing models is more holistic as opposed to saying that this is the best way, because there is no unicorn. There's a unicorn for each of us, but there's no one unicorn that's going to work for all of us, for sure.
Amen to that. Amen to that. So again, Scott, thanks. If you guys want to view this again, it's gonna be on YouTube. You can go to my channel. It's JRL Golf Academy. I teach out of Angeles National Golf Club here in Los Angeles. If there's anything you guys ever need, you guys can hit me up. I'm on Instagram, Leary_golf, just like Scott. That's where I post most of my stuff, and it gets out to the world. So with that, Scott, thank you so much. And I'm holding you to being back on here soon, okay?
Thanks for watching, everybody, the JRL Golf Academy. Please make sure to link and comment down below. Make sure you subscribe and turn on that little bell for notifications. And we look forward to seeing you on the next JRL Golf Academy.